The towers still rise. The cranes still turn on construction sites scattered across the skyline. The sales centers still open every morning with gleaming models, virtual tours, and payment plans designed to make anything feel achievable. On the surface, nothing looks stalled, nothing looks abandoned. But walk through a property viewing on a random Saturday morning, and the reality starts to shift. The units are finished. The lighting is perfect. The amenities are world-class. But the prospective buyers who once filled these spaces feel fewer, more cautious, almost calculating. Agents wait longer between inquiries than they used to. Developers are offering incentives that would have been unnecessary just 2 years ago. Mortgage brokers are adjusting their pitch, focusing less on appreciation and more on stability. And behind the scenes, conversations are happening in quiet offices, conversations that were never meant to reach buyer markets. One broker put it simply, the confidence isn't what it was. That single sentence captures a shift that transaction data alone cannot fully explain. Before we go deeper into this analysis, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because what you're about to hear goes far beyond property listings and surface-level market reports. Because the real question is no longer whether Dubai's real estate still looks attractive. It clearly does. The real question is whether the fundamental dynamics that drove relentless demand are still functioning the way they used to. And more importantly, whether investors are beginning to notice that something feels different. Not crashed, not collapsed, but changed in a way that is subtle, structural, and potentially far more significant. The kind of change that doesn't trigger circuit breakers, but quietly reshapes capital allocation over time. To understand how significant this moment is, you have to go back to what Dubai's real estate market was designed to be. This wasn't just another property market competing for investment. Dubai positioned itself as the ultimate wealth preservation ecosystem. Tax-advantaged, globally connected, and physically aspirational, it became a place where capital flows from every direction converged. Over the course of a single decade, property values in prime areas tripled, sometimes quadrupled, transforming the city into one of the most dynamic real estate markets on Earth. The vision behind it, driven by strategic initiatives like freehold zones, golden visas, and infrastructure megaprojects, wasn't incremental appreciation. It was exponential transformation, bigger developments, bolder architecture, more ambitious timelines. And for years, that strategy worked almost perfectly. Dubai didn't just build apartments, it built aspirations. Waterfront towers with Burj Khalifa views, villa communities on artificial islands, branded residences attached to global luxury names like Armani, Bulgari, and Versace. Investment firms channeled billions. High-net-worth individuals diversified portfolios. Speculators followed momentum. And for a period of time, Dubai achieved something very few markets ever do. It became not just a real estate destination, but a global wealth narrative, a symbol of tax efficiency, lifestyle upgrade, and engineered appreciation. But narratives are powerful and fragile because the higher valuations rise, the more visible even the smallest corrections become. And what's happening now isn't the result of a single policy change or a single downturn. It's the result of multiple pressures building at the same time, slowly eroding the assumptions beneath the pricing. Not dramatic enough to cause panic selling overnight, but persistent enough to change behavior, perception, and capital commitment. One of the earliest visible signals came not from headlines, but from patterns. Transaction volumes began to shift, not disappear entirely, but redistribute. Buyers who once defaulted to Dubai started considering alternatives: Portugal's Golden Visa, Greece's residency programs, UAE's neighboring Emirates. Off-plan sales, which once felt almost guaranteed to flip profitably, began showing longer holding periods. Developers that were once consistently oversubscribed started offering post-handover payment plans. And while official narratives remained optimistic, launch timelines were quietly adjusted behind the scenes. This wasn't panic, it was recalibration. Then came moments that accelerated that shift. events that forced the global investor audience to pause and reassess. When supply projections exceeded 100,000 units entering the market within 18 months, it wasn't just the volume that mattered, it was the composition. Off-plan projects stacking on top of each other in already saturated clusters. And, in a market driven by scarcity perception, sudden abundance triggers questions. Questions followed. Not loud at first, but persistent. If supply is this deep, what happens to pricing power? But the deeper story sits below those visible moments, because the real pressure is structural. Financing costs have been rising at a pace that is increasingly difficult to ignore. Mortgage rates that hovered near 3 to 4% have climbed towards 6 to 7% in some cases. For a market where the majority of transactions involve leverage, investors, upgraders, speculators, that shift matters enormously, because when the people who sustain market liquidity, flippers, second home buyers, portfolio diversifiers, begin to feel squeezed by carrying costs, the effects ripple outward. Holding periods extend, exit strategies change, and eventually capital itself begins to redistribute. At the same time, the composition of buyers is evolving. The global wealth landscape is more fragmented than ever. Destinations across Europe, Asia, and even within the GCC are offering different combinations of residency, taxation, and lifestyle. Investors are comparing options more carefully. Liquidity matters more, regulatory stability matters more, and in that comparison, Dubai is no longer competing in an uncontested space. It is competing in a global capital marketplace where expectations are rising and alternatives are expanding. Layered on top of this are regulatory realities that are becoming harder to ignore. Ownership structures, service charges, and maintenance obligations that were once secondary considerations are now influencing how buyers evaluate long-term value. Strata laws are tightening, community fees are rising, and while Dubai has invested heavily in professionalizing property management, the long-term cost implications remain part of the conversation, especially for investors calculating net yields and total cost of ownership. There is also a demographic dimension that often stays out of the spotlight, but underpins everything. The resident population that rents, works, and consumes within these properties is essential to their functioning. Their stability, their income growth, and their retention rates shape the reality behind occupancy metrics. And as cost of living pressures mount, conversations around affordability, rental yield compression, and tenant turnover are becoming part of how properties are evaluated, not just as assets, but as income-generating ecosystems. Then comes the macroeconomic layer, perhaps the most complex of all. For years, Dubai's strategic advantage was its ability to attract capital from multiple geographies simultaneously. Asian wealth, European diversification, GCC liquidity, and Russian safe haven flows. It positioned itself as a place where different capital sources could intersect without friction. But in an increasingly multipolar financial environment, maintaining that balance becomes more difficult. Sanctions shift flows, currency volatility affects purchasing power, and even indirect geopolitical associations can influence how a market is viewed by different capital pools across different regions. What makes this moment particularly significant is not that Dubai's real estate is collapsing. It isn't. The skyline is still expanding. The quality is still world-class. The ambition is still there. But the equation that once felt perfectly aligned is becoming more complex, more variables, more sensitivity, more trade-offs. Investors are underwriting more conservatively. Developers are pricing more competitively. Buyers are negotiating more aggressively than ever before. And when a market that once thrived on momentum begins to decelerate, even slightly, that shift becomes incredibly important. Because Dubai's real estate success was never just about construction. It was about conviction. The belief that values would continue appreciating faster than alternatives, that liquidity would remain constant, that demand would always outpace supply. And when that belief starts to be questioned, even quietly, It changes behavior in ways that don't immediately show up in transaction reports, but slowly reshape the entire pricing structure. And that leads to the core question. Dubai's real estate was never just a market, it was a promise. A promise that with the right timing, the right location, and the right vision, you could build wealth in a place designed specifically to protect and grow it. That promise still exists, but it is now being tested by realities that cannot be solved by marketing alone. So what happens next? Does Dubai's market adapt, mature, and redefine that promise for a more sophisticated investor base? Or does it become something more stratified, more exclusive, and less accessible than the version that captured global capital's imagination in the first place? Because the truth is, what we're seeing right now may not be a crash. It may be a normalization. And normalizations are where the real long-term dynamics begin. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Has your perception of Dubai's real estate market changed? Or do you think this is just another cycle in its evolution? And if you want more deep dive analyses that go beyond the surface and into what's really happening in global property markets, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned, because the next story is already unfolding.